Marine veteran Paul Whelan is speaking out for the first time since his release from a Russian prison. You'll recall that Whelan was one of 3 Americans freed in a prisoner swap last August. We brought that to you live, and he was held in Russia for more than 5 years. Whelan spoke with Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan about the toll of life in captivity.
It did play with my mind. There was a psychological piece to this that even though now, I seem like I'm doing okay, I've put back on some of the weight that I lost. I see a picture of me from the prison, or I see a picture of me from court that's on TV, and that takes me back to being in that court or being in the prison.
Ryan Fayhee joins me now. He is the attorney for Paul Whelan. You actually know Paul. You have been with him in these last few months. What has it been like for him to be back in the United States?
Well, thank you very much for having me, and always glad to share a success that was 5.5 years in the making. It's been great to be around Paul here in Washington, D.C. these past couple of months on his short visits. First, to thank members of Congress, officials at the State Department, at the NSC, and the White House for doing everything they could to help bring Paul home. It's been great to see him in action and engaging with other Americans. He's very, very proud of his country for having done what he's done. And now he's at the stage where he's ready to share part of his story and how he's doing. And the big reason for that is because he's very eager to help educate the American public around the risks of traveling to Russia as an American citizen with a blue passport.
And Ryan, as you're telling us this, we're watching some of that video, and I'm remembering as we all were just waiting breathlessly to see him emerge after arriving back on U.S. soil. I'm wondering if, as his attorney, you ever thought maybe he might not get released?
Well, I have to say I have, as Paul did, I have faith in our government. Even though it took longer than any of us, including Paul, would have hoped. I really do have confidence in the ability of the Trump administration, now the Biden administration, the relentless effort to bring Americans home. So in reality, no, I didn't think for a second that this ultimately wouldn't have been resolved. I'm grateful that it finally was, and obviously very grateful to see Paul putting the pieces of his life back together, however long that takes.
And Ryan, I'm wondering, as 5 years spent in a Russian prison took its toll on Paul, what changes did you see in your client?
Well, it's difficult to know. I'm actually getting to know Paul for the first time. Really, I'm a longtime resident of D.C., served in the Justice Department for many years and volunteered pro bono to help his family get to know this city and try to raise the profile of Paul's case. Before Paul came home and we met actually on the tarmac down in San Antonio, Texas, I'd only talked to him one time via phone call. So we're actually getting to know each other as we speak. Today, he's here in town with me. And what I can tell you is that it did have an impact on Paul being in prison for 5.5 years and being exploited by the Russian government for the purposes of trying to extract a benefit from the United States. It's going to take time for him to heal, but he's on the right track and he's doing very, very well so far.
And I just want to give some context for our viewers. When you say you were only able to talk to him one time, that wasn't for a lack of trying. That was because the Russian legal system wasn't permitting it, right?
Well, I was his local Washington, D.C. lawyer, and again, I really was helping the family get to know and understand Washington, D.C., to try to elevate the status of Paul's case and hold the government accountable for seeking his return. Of course, he had Russian lawyers. Part of my resistance in trying to reach out or to talk to Paul is that I didn't really want to reveal the cards from here in Washington, D.C. by having our phone calls obviously monitored and overheard while he was in prison. So it was intentional not to speak to him. Really, I was here to enable the family's advocacy efforts.
That's very interesting. Ryan, I'm wondering if you can tell us about that moment where you saw that window of opportunity first opening for Paul to return home.
Well, there were many windows open over the course of 5.5 years, and unfortunately they closed for Paul. About a week and a half or two before Paul was ultimately released, of course, I and his family had a sense that we were getting as close as we ever had. We had regular interactions with the White House and with Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor in particular, who had taken it as his personal mission to help get this case resolved by what he said was enlarging the problem to try to get Paul's release. That means drawing on a better deal both for the United States and on the other side for Russia to account for ultimately what it was the Russians wanted, an assassin who was in the custody of Germany. And so at that point, I had a pretty good sense that Paul would be coming home. But of course, until I saw him, at least via pictures, boarding a plane in Turkey, destined for the United States, only then did it really become real for me, and I know for him.
Yeah. Well, it is so good to see him there with Margaret, looking well. And of course, we're delighted that he and the other Americans are back here, as we, of course, remember that there are still others that are imprisoned abroad. Brian Fayhee, thank you.
Thank you.
And you can watch Margaret Brennan's full interview with Paul Whelan on Face the Nation this Sunday at 12:30 p.m. and 2 p.m. Eastern right here on CBS News 24/7.